Welcome everyone to Dropkick DiSKussions presented by Sportskeeda. I'm your host, Korey Gunz, along as always with wrestling insider extraordinaire Tom Colohue. And it is that time of the year, Tom. It is time for everybody to start pointing at the WrestleMania sign.
I like that we've already had several people pointing at the sign. It's a shame they weren't there actually during the Rumble so that everyone could do the pointing. Still not an insider.
Oh, see, what, journalist, I guess would probably be
journalist. Let's go with journalist. Yeah, I write about wrestling.
Well, let's talk about a little bit of wrestling now. We've got, I mean, man, what a 48, really throw NXT Worlds Collide in there, really a great 72 hours of wrestling. We're coming off this past weekend. You had Worlds Collide on Saturday, obviously the Royal Rumble on Sunday, and then even Raw on Monday night I thought was a really strong show, heading into this Friday's SmackDown. So it's been a really solid week for the WWE. Let's first talk about some Royal Rumble takes. Obviously, the big story of the week has to be the return of Edge. He returns as an entrant into the Royal Rumble after 9 years, from what most people could tell, and I think even Edge himself would probably tell you at the time, was believed to be a career-ending neck injury. He comes back, and I got to tell you, this return is going to be really stick out in my mind for two big reasons. Number one, and I talked to Tom about this off air already, but Sunday night I'm watching the Rumble. Where everything's been going smooth all night, been watching the show. The buzzer goes off, Edge's music hits, and as soon as his music hits, my WWE network crashes. Like literally as, You Think You Know Me comes on and the crowd goes wild, my screen goes black and it crashes. So right off the bat, I am just scrambling trying to get it back on. I finally find my spot and kind of rewind it and get to where I was. But then after I see the return, number two, and probably the most important thing, is WWE, get your camera work right. When Edge is coming back, I want to see a shot of Edge, not shots of the crowd reacting to Edge. Like, just put the camera on the aisleway and let me experience this like everybody else. It just drives me crazy, the cuts that they used. I couldn't get over the fact. There's 5 or 6 seconds of crowd reaction shots. You don't even see Edge until he's kind of through the smoke and he's already making his entrance down the aisle. Gosh, it gets on my nerves. Like I hate the WWE's camera work right now. I gotta tell you, especially on Sunday.
I'm totally with you, particularly around that first spear. You want to see him come in a house of fire. You could see Dolph Ziggler marshalling the troops, getting everybody ready. Okay, you're taking it first. You're taking it first. Everybody ready and in the corner. Everybody was prepared to make Edge look like $1,000,000. He was going to look incredible. They were going to protect this. They were going to protect that. You can see they're being careful with his neck, particularly for Baron Corbin's deep smooth. Edge is cradling his neck, and also it is the slowest I have ever seen the impact of that move. They took him out very carefully as well, so there is definitely still some concern, at least from the wrestlers, about Edge's neck, but you probably worked out from Raw that there is no concern from Edge about his neck.
Yeah, that would probably be an understatement.
Yeah.
Let's talk about first the return itself. Going into the Rumble, we heard all kinds of rumors about Edge possibly returning. Paige was lumped in there as well. Of course, we heard the CM Punk is coming back rumors. And I think going into Sunday, for the most part, people had kind of resigned themselves to the fact that all of this was rumor and innuendo and that there would not be any type of major returns from any of those three. And then lo and behold, hey, Edge is there. He blows the roof off of the place whenever he comes in. You got to tip your hat to the WWE. I think they kind of got us on this one, didn't they?
They did, and I'm very happy to be got. The website in question I want to briefly mention without mentioning the name, as is my want as you know, but it's a coup for them to get the news that Edge would return. It's unfortunate that they also reported that Paige would return, Sting would return, but they also got a lot right. They said Victoria was there when she wasn't, but they also said Kelly, Beth Phoenix, names like that. So it was a bit of a half and half, but they got the big one, and that's the one people are going to remember. I did not believe it. I was not being told anything about this. A couple of people have had a chuckle to themselves at my expense, clearly. But that's fine. I mean, on the joke, it's fine. You have that moment when Edge comes back, and I missed the height of Edge. but I caught up on it later on, and he really connected with me because of how unique and different he was. He didn't go into that ring as a winner. He never did. At no point did he overpower anybody. He was sneaky, he was cunning, it was incredible.
Yeah, it's got to be up there as one of the biggest returns, not only for shock value, but I think also you saw the emotion on his face whenever he came out, and I think when you get those real moments in wrestling, that's what makes wrestling great and really brings us all as fans back to the reason that we fell in love with wrestling in the first place. And so for me, as a guy that is a big Edge fan and has really seen his career from the time he came in to the WWE as part of the Brood all the way up to the Rated R Superstar stuff, for me as a fan, it was awesome to see, and I appreciated the shock value. You know, sometimes it's not, as a fan, it's nice to be surprised. I don't always want to know what's going to happen ahead of time. That's what makes wrestling fun. And so this was put a smile on my face on Sunday night for sure. And then we go into Monday, and as you alluded to, it would seem that Edge is back. He's ready to go. He certainly doesn't feel like he has any limitations on himself at this point. We see the big angle with Randy Orton at the end of Raw, where Orton turns on his former Rated RKO tag team partner, gives him the concerto. It would seem like this is the program that we're heading into going into WrestleMania. Is that the feeling that you get, is that at WrestleMania we'll see Edge versus Orton in really his first big primetime matchup since his comeback?
I see that being the feud. I don't necessarily think it's going to go all the way until WrestleMania. That is more than 2 months away. I do think we may see some engagement in Saudi Arabia, but what we do know and what we've learned from TalkSport's Alex McCarthy, who did the journalism in the field, as it were, was that we are expecting to have 5 matches with Edge and 25 appearances total. So it'll be similar to Brock Lesnar in that it probably appears before and after pay-per-views, hypes things up, and then we see a match actually at the pay-per-view. So WrestleMania is a definite possibility. Randy Orton is definitely the right man for the job in this regard. He's very safe unless you're one of the Singh brothers. And from there, I do think Saudi Arabia is a definite possibility. There are a number of people Edge will probably want to work with. I think Baron Corbin is going to be one of those that they really want to have him in the ring with because of how safe Baron Corbin is. But I also think that the second Edge is in the ring with Randy Orton, he's going to be sort of Kota Ibushiing his own neck as a way of proving, look, I'm fine.
The segment on Raw, do you think that it was not maybe rushed, but maybe we got to that segment or maybe this point in the feud sooner than maybe anticipated due to what appears to be an AJ Styles injury at the Rumble? It looked like Styles got legitimately hurt. He seemed to kind of call it in the ring for Edge to eliminate him. And we've seen reports that maybe it's a shoulder injury and that he may miss WrestleMania this year. He and Orton had a little issue going on Raw. So have you had any inkling that maybe the AJ Styles injury kind of pushed this Orton Edge segment up a couple of weeks since they kind of had to abandon the angle with AJ Styles due to his injury?
I do. They hadn't reached the crescendo, as it were, for Orton versus Styles. It would have been difficult for them to have all that build and not to have a match at the end of it. But that is the case. I mean, they definitely stepped up. It could have been that we had this exact spot and then Edge took some time off to sell the injuries, in which case they finished the feud between Orton and Styles. But that wouldn't have left us an opportunity to have sort of the conclusive match, whereas it was probably supposed to be an Elimination Chamber or a Saudi Arabia show. That was when it was supposed to be. We'll have to see in the build to that, but Styles' injury definitely has a lot of potential to be severe. We'll have to wait for more information, but shoulder injuries like that can be very difficult to recover from quickly. If you look back to Finn Balor and the injury that he had with his shoulder. From what I can tell, the return schedule is around WrestleMania, which is awkward. Even as a phrase, it's awkward because it could be in time for WrestleMania, but that is that in time for a match. Will he have the time to have match fitness and to try and test it out and everything beforehand? Will he have time to build a storyline? So at the moment, from what I can tell, AJ Styles will not be at WrestleMania.
You alluded a little bit already about kind of Edge's schedule and maybe what we can plan to see from him going forward. We've heard reports that it's a 3-year deal, a part-time deal, so obviously he's not going to be a full-time roster member, but for the next 3 years, he'll, pop up every couple months and probably hit some of those marquee events and get some major angles or some type of big-time match at those. Can you give us any information about the validity of those contract details as far as the length and kind of how they're going to plan to use them? And what, as a fan, what are some things that you would like to see during this maybe last full run of Edge? Is there any opponents you'd like to see him lock up with, or any feuds you'd like to see him have, just from a fan's perspective?
Contracts-wise, talking about the validity of the details, I have no information myself. However, I have known Alex McCarthy for quite a while. I've read quite a lot of his interviews. He does go very in-depth, talk to the right people, and he asks the right questions. So I fully believe the information that he's given. It seems a lot of other people do as well, because they're all reporting the information. So we'll see. That has not been confirmed by other sources yet, whereas, for example, the Brock Lesnar Riddle altercation has been confirmed by multiple other sources since. So that backs up the story as well, even if there hasn't been direct confirmation from others yet. When it comes to who I'd like to see him feud with, there aren't many people I wouldn't like to see feud with. Now, there's a few which are, and I mean physically here, simply too big, I feel, for Edge to have a strong showing against. I don't think Edge versus Brock Lesnar is a match anyone really wants to see. That's not a German suplex I want in my life, especially not for the 15 that will follow. Braun Strowman, I think that's not going to work out. Ultimately, Edge does have a very weak-looking spear if you're a bigger guy. So I don't see him against really Roman or anyone like that, but Seth Rollins is a good example. I think Buddy Murphy and Edge would have an extremely good match. And then there's a couple of the favourite pitch hitters, Orton, AJ Styles. For me, people like Buddy Murphy, Ricochet, I think could really benefit and have a great match with Edge. And that's on Raw at the minute. I'm sure there are some on SmackDown as well. For example, Xavier Woods, Kofi Kingston. Give me those.
I'll throw this one out there, and I'm sure there's probably a less than 1% chance that we're going to see this, considering the situations with all involved. But
he's not going to wrestle Becky Lynch, mate.
Oh, well, see, I didn't even think of that, but that's another good one. That would have been one. But I'll throw this one out. I'd love to see him and Beth Phoenix against Matt Hardy and Lita before Matt finally maybe heads out the door. How about that match?
Several reasons why that's not going to happen. First of all, maybe Hardy, but that's definitely an interesting one. I don't think they're going to drag up that much history, even if the two men are well past it now.
Well, you mentioned Brock Lesnar, potential Brock Lesnar Edge match. So let's talk about Brock's booking at the Rumble. Obviously, he came in number one, made some history, coming in as number one and as the current WWE champion. And the match, we talked about it on our Rumble preview, and you kind of gave an idea of how you thought the match would go as far as Brock coming in and dominating early and eliminating guys right and left. And that's pretty much how it went. I'm not sure we anticipated it going as long as it did. I think he eliminated the first, the first 13? Yeah, guys to come in. He had a little bit of run there where they had more than one guy at a time, but for the most part, they came in, they went right back out. There was some sentiment online that maybe this was quote-unquote burying the guys that came in to have Brock Lesnar, just toss them out one after the other. As a fan, I get the booking of Brock and why they did it the way they did it. There were some individuals that just I'm fans of that I didn't like being seen treated as just fodder for Brock. Shinsuke Nakamura is one in particular, just for the fact that since he's the IC champion, I thought that wasn't necessarily a great look for him to be a champion and just get tossed in 10, 15 seconds. But I get the idea behind the way that Brock was represented in this match. Did you have any issue with Brock Lesnar's run in the Rumble, and did you see that as quote-unquote burying anybody that he did toss over the top rope on Sunday?
There was a lot of confusion over the term burying. The idea seems to be that losing a match is being buried, and that's simply not the case. I'll go into a bit more detail bit by bit, but firstly, when you mentioned that we did sort of fantasy booked this ahead of time, and I did expect roughly this to happen. I did expect it to be the first 7 to 10. It did go to 13 or 14. But the whole idea, and I've been hearing about this for a few weeks, since before the R-Truth segment, Brock Lesnar was building up hatred and building up hatred and building up hatred for that one massive pop, which ended up translating to 2 massive pops for Drew McIntyre. Drew McIntyre was the story, Brock was the storytelling device. Unfortunately, as part of that, there were a lot more storytelling devices that were sort of sacrificed to Brock, not necessarily a burial. Let's look at the individuals and see how it worked out. So who was number 2? Oh, number 2 is Elias. He came out and announced himself as the sacrificial lamb. It's Elias. He's got a huge groundswell of popularity. Everyone expected number 2 to go out quickly, but Elias got a little bit of time to sing a song, got himself over a little bit more. Don't see that as a burial. Number 3 was Eric Rowan. I do think this was a bit of a burial, because Eric Rowan has been undefeated for quite a long time. He's still winning with the enhancement talent matches, and he was eliminated in 8 seconds. Now, they played it a little bit smart, so it looked like Rowan made a mistake and potentially eliminated himself. No. 8 seconds is a very short amount of time. There's no getting around that. It was not a good showing. So I'll say there, I will call that a bit of a burial. Robert Roode came in, a heel, not the most popular guy, eliminated in 41 seconds. Wouldn't call it a burial. He's still involved in the storyline with Roman Reigns. A lot of this is what storyline is going on. After that was John Morrison. He was eliminated in 9 seconds. But once again, he's just come back. He's on a groundswell of momentum. He'll be wrestling with New Day soon. And based on this, he may well win the tag team titles soon with The Miz. So that way they could immediately get his heat back. We'll have to wait till SmackDown to actually see. But I wouldn't consider that a burial. What followed was what I think was a very good segment. Kofi Kingston, Rey Mysterio, Big E. Big E was only in the match for 53 seconds, but even briefly he was presented as Brock's equal. He got some good hits in. The crowd were going for it. Everyone was working together. It was that moment, that temptation, the tease. Look, this is going to go great. And obviously having Kofi Kingston there in the history of Brock Lesnar, we saw a bit of a different Kofi. We saw a bit of the Kofi that was potentially planned beforehand. I've reported on Sportskeeda that Kofi was supposed to be building a bit more aggression and a bit more of an edge working towards a rematch. We saw that. We saw that in this match. It just didn't work out, unfortunately. I wouldn't say any of them were buried, but I would say they were useful in their roles. Number 9 was Cesaro. He was in for 18 seconds. I remember none of that, and yeah, I consider that something of a burial on that regard. Number 10 was Shelton Benjamin. They played it for storyline. It's difficult to bury someone who's never on TV. So that's all I'll say in that regard. Shelton Benjamin's a very talented wrestler. They played the storyline angle. It got a little bit of a rub, and then he was eliminated because he was trusting of his friend. Don't really consider that too big an issue. You've mentioned Nakamura. He was number 11. He only lasted 20 seconds. I remember nothing of him. That's a bit of a burial. MVP was number 12. You may hear a little chuckle there. MVP was number 12. Didn't expect this. The idea was that because he was a return, even not necessarily a big return, he'd get a decent pop, which he did get. And then upon elimination, you'd get more of a boo for Brock, and you'd be looking at Brock like, oh, he's just throwing everyone out. You had to bury people a little bit in this sequence to hate Brock more. Because what followed, of course, was Keith Lee. I mentioned Keith Lee by name, did I not?
Yes, you did. He was one of your picks for NXT representation. Yeah,
one of the picks for that. I definitely expected this moment for Keith Lee to come out and be presented as Brock Lesnar's equal. He came out, he was presented as Brock Lesnar's equal. Great showing. Braun Strowman came out next. He was getting tangled with Keith Lee, and it was a double elimination. Braun didn't gain anything, but I wouldn't say he was buried either. After that, we had Ricochet come in, Drew McIntyre come in, and I would just like to say, when Drew McIntyre came out, the way Brock Lesnar reacted made me absolutely certain that Drew McIntyre was winning this Rumble. Brock Lesnar was scared of Drew McIntyre. Brock is a great actor with his facial expressions. I've got to give him credit. This was all built for that moment. Brock Lesnar was terrified of Drew McIntyre, and after being eliminated, he laid there and was still terrified of Drew McIntyre. Mixed bag as to who was buried and who wasn't. I think there were some burials of minor degrees, but it depends what comes next as to what momentum they're getting. If Nakamura beats Braun Strowman clean, we will never be talking about a burial again.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. You know, I'm kind of like you. I get the story, and so I didn't take too much offense, you know, to going on. I get why they did it. I'm like you. I thought the little segment with Kofi and then Ray and then Big E, you know, all guys that had some personal issues with Brock, and so they all team up, and so you get kind of feel like maybe Brock is in a little bit of trouble. I thought that was really great storytelling at the time. Even the small piece that Ricochet had in the Ultimate Elimination of Brock Lesnar, you know, getting him back with the low blow that he gave him the week before on Raw, I thought was a nice callback, you know, giving just that little bit of edge or that little bit of help to Drew McIntyre to get him out of there. So I agree for the most part. I don't really, if you look at the story that they were trying to tell with the Rumble and the way that it put over Drew McIntyre, I don't think you could say that it was anything less than a success, not the way that they booked Brock and really the Rumble itself. You mentioned that in our Rumble show, you know, we gave our quote-unquote expert opinions about how we thought the show would go, and we both thought that the winner of the Rumble would be Roman Reigns, and who was the runner-up, so we were close on that. But we thought that it would probably play out that Roman Reigns would win the Rumble, go on to challenge The Fiend, and then whoever eliminated Brock Lesnar would ultimately be the guy who would challenge him for WrestleMania. Drew McIntyre ends up doing both. He eliminates Brock Lesnar and wins the whole thing, and then ends up challenging Brock Lesnar the next Monday on Raw. Were you surprised at all that they went with the route of Drew being the guy to not only eliminate the big bad monster Brock, but then also go on to win the entire match, as opposed to what a lot of people thought was that whoever eliminated Brock would be the quasi winner and be the Raw competitor to challenge at WrestleMania, and that then they would probably go with a SmackDown representative to win the Rumble. So how surprised were you, you know, that Drew kind of ran the gauntlet and did both?
I was very pleasantly surprised that this happened. I think it was a great choice just all in all. There were a few things at play here. Obviously, we did mention in the preview Cain Velasquez, who had stated that he would be in the Royal Rumble, and he was not. So I can't say what happened there, but he thoroughly believed he was in the Royal Rumble, and then when we get to the Rumble, he's been pulled. He wasn't the only one. There was a few people who were supposed to be in the Rumble and were taken out last minute. It could have been they were trying to protect surprises. I think a lot of people were down on the Rumble beforehand because of lack of surprises. So maybe they were just trying to inject a little bit more due to the response to fans. Who knows there? When it comes to Drew McIntyre, though, I've got to say that was definitely the right call. It's interesting because in the hours before the show, Drew McIntyre suddenly became an overwhelming favourite when it comes to betting and gambling. Something got leaked. And this happened a few years ago with Randy Orton. I believe it was 2017, I want to say, when he went on to face Bray Wyatt. Yeah. In that match as well, Roman Reigns was also the runner-up. He's been runner-up in 3 Royal Rumbles in the last 4 years, and one of which he wasn't available for, because you know eliminating Roman gets a big pop. That's just how it works. I don't think it got a big pop based on it being Roman this year, which shows how far he's come. But when it comes to Drew having that big moment, it was clearly a last-minute decision, and it's something that Paul Heyman's been pushing for a long time. He believes in Drew McIntyre. We've seen the changes being made. We've seen that they want to market Drew to particularly go to these UK crowds. BT Sport move is definitely something that's really worked out. And I also reported about the time of the King of the Ring tournament that a big push and a championship match was coming Drew McIntyre's way, but it wasn't there because of an injury he had at the time, or an illness. I think it was a sickness of some sort. So they've come back around, and the opportunity is still there, and they've taken it. I'm very pleasantly surprised, and I'm looking forward to what comes next.
Yeah, it would seem Drew would definitely have full support of Paul Heyman over on Raw. And you had an interesting report this week about maybe a creative struggle that's going on inside the WWE right now between Paul Heyman and Vince McMahon about what exactly will main event WrestleMania. And by main event, we mean what match will go on last on the show. Paul Heyman wants it to be, obviously, Drew McIntyre and Brock Lesnar. And Vince seems to want Roman Reigns and The Fiend. And, of course, we are going ahead and assuming that will be the Universal Championship match at WrestleMania. Obviously, that's yet to be confirmed. We'll see what happens on SmackDown if they kind of start going that direction. But let's assume, for argument's sake, that will be the matchup. That would be Vince's preference, is Reigns-Wyatt closing the show. What can you tell us about maybe a difference of opinion, which isn't unusual to hear about a difference of opinion between Vince McMahon and Paul Heyman, but what can you tell us about their differing views on what they think should close down the biggest show of the year?
Well, when it comes to this, Paul Heyman has been pushing for Drew McIntyre. He's been pushing for a lot of people on Raw. He's really been developing the talent pool there, seeing what he's got. He's a very smart man, Paul Heyman. He's always got his finger on the pulse. And I'm excited for the choices that he's making. However, WrestleMania, by law as it were, has always been Vince McMahon's domain. They usually plan about a year in advance. They haven't been able to this year because of so many changes and moving to Fox and a shake-up and a draft, a shake-up where people changed hands afterwards anyway. And then the wildcard rule, there's been so much going on, but the idea of Wyatt versus Reigns has been the one consistent for a year. That's been the one consistent thing that they wanted to do. Right after WrestleMania last year, Bray Wyatt started getting advertised, and it caught fire. Everything he did caught fire. He has been incredibly popular for the entirety of 2019. People have been begging to get him more and more chances. The idea is that The Fiend could main event WrestleMania and potentially beat Roman Reigns. I've been told for a couple of months that's a match they're looking at. That's a match they want to do, and that is a win they want as well. I believed until this Royal Rumble that WrestleMania would end with The Fiend standing over Roman Reigns' prone body holding the championship. Now you're telling me, after all this and everything that Bray Wyatt's done, let's put him in the mid-card and keep him out of the main event. And the worst part is, you're telling me this because Drew McIntyre genuinely deserves it as well. This is a genuine contender. Drew McIntyre versus Brock Lesnar will be a great match, and it is fully deserving. And the winner of the Royal Rumble could main event WrestleMania again. It seems like it's been forever since that happened. I want to see that. I mean, the men's Rumble, of course, because I know Becky main evented last year. I want to see that, but I also am a huge fan of Bray Wyatt. How do you make this choice? And it's a good thing. This is something that happens a lot in sport. When you've got a really good team, it's hard to pick people for each position. You have selection dilemmas. You're not sure who to choose. Last year we had, what's the main event going to be? Rollins-Lesnar, Kofi Bryan, women's triple threat. We had 3 solid contenders. This year we have 2 so far. It's a good place to be. I'm not sure who's going to win through on this one, but at the moment, Vince McMahon is still a fan of The Fiend versus Roman Reigns.
Let's switch over to the women's side of things now. The Women's Rumble, and what I think was a surprise result. Charlotte comes out on top. The betting favorite going into the match was Shayna Baszler. Me and you talked on our Rumble preview that Baszler was your pick win. We talked about the possibilities of maybe Sasha Banks, who ended up not even being in the Rumble due to an injury. I went out on a limb and guessed Nia Jax as the winner, who again wasn't even in the match.
It's a good call, mate. It's a good call.
But Charlotte is the one that gets the nod here, and it was a surprise result. But again, if you look at the online community, it seems like a lot of people are upset about this, and a lot of people were going with the idea that, Charlotte always wins. Charlotte's boring. She always wins. Why'd they have her win the Rumble? Yada, yada, yada. But really, when you look at it, not only did I not think anyone was calling for that Charlotte would win the match, so you'd think that that's a positive in and of itself, that, hey, it was a surprise result. No one was calling it, so everyone had to have been shocked. I know I was, when it was her and Baszler as the final 2, and everyone assumed Baszler was the one that was going to win, and Charlotte ends up coming out on top. But also, if you checked out the interview that Gary Cassidy did with Charlotte along with Andrade just a couple weeks ago, Charlotte even addressed this fact and talked about the idea that everyone thinks that she wins all the time, and if you actually go back and look at her win-loss record, and I know that win-loss records don't matter in wrestling, no one's actually, for the most part, keeping up with that stuff, but she contended that if you go back and look at her record, she's lost more matches in the past year than anybody else on the roster. So she gets the nod at the Rumble. It's a surprise result. It leaves a lot of storyline options. As you saw on Raw, she did not make her choice of who she was going to challenge, so it leaves a lot of gray area there in different directions they can go, and yet people still seemed upset at the result and just fall back on the argument of, well, Charlotte wins all the time, we're tired of Charlotte. What did you make of this decision to have Charlotte win the Rumble and this backlash against Charlotte just in general, with the idea that Charlotte always wins and we're getting too much Charlotte Flair in the women's division?
At the time, I was very surprised, which again is a good thing in a Royal Rumble. But with Shayna Baszler coming out at number 30, throwing people around, I expected a dominant, clear victory, which didn't happen. So that's a good thing as far as I'm concerned in that regard. There, once again, is a lot at play here, and literally this decision could affect, and in fact will affect, all 3 women's title matches on the WrestleMania card. And yes, I said 3 there. This, of course, this podcast is recorded before NXT, but comes out after. There are strong rumours that Charlotte will challenge Rhea Ripley at NXT. I can't see anything else happening. I really can't see any other possibility. Because Charlotte and Bayley have feuded a lot. Charlotte and Becky have feuded a lot. And it is still incredibly likely that we're going to see Becky and Shayna. That is still what I believe will happen. We have to ask what would have happened if Sasha had been in the match. If Sasha had been in the match, she could again potentially have won it and set off a storyline with Bayley. Now we'll see what happens. I know, and I have to laugh at this one, I tweeted that Sasha's ankle injury may be worse than originally expected because she had a kayfabe ankle injury on SmackDown. I was trying to make a joke, guys. Wasn't reporting the news. Chill out. I thought I always made it very clear that news that I report is on Sportskeeda, but here we are. Anyway, when it comes to things like that, there are so many possibilities that if Sasha was fit and ready to go, she would have been in that match, she would have won that match. Now, they're not sure when Sasha is going to be back. They thought she might be back before the Rumble, but it turned out she wasn't. A lot of things, again, last minute when it comes to the Royal Rumble, because one of the things, you mentioned the interview with Charlotte that Gary Cassidy had. At that point, I found it very unlikely that she would have known that she was winning the Rumble. Not just because of other factors like I've mentioned, but they tell them very late that they're going to win the Royal Rumble. Very late indeed. There have been times when people have found out they're winning the Royal Rumble on the day of the Royal Rumble. They've literally gone into rehearsals and been told, all right, and so at the end of the match, you eliminate them. Oh, I'm winning. Yeah, did no one tell you? No one told you. No, that does happen. So she probably didn't know at that point, but I think the reaction to her is great heel work. She's really got people hating her, and the same people think Brock Lesnar's lazy, which is so confusing. But there is still a lot of kayfabe alive in the world, and you can see that through moments like this. I think the only way to get to Charlotte Rhea was to have Charlotte win the Royal Rumble. It sets up something interesting, using the dynamic of being able to challenge anyone. So I'll take it. And if we're going to get Charlotte Flair versus Rhea Ripley, I will definitely take it.
Yeah, I don't think anyone could dispute that they wouldn't want to see that match. And with all the backlash that Charlotte gets, or is getting for this Rumble win, if she does end up challenging Rhea Ripley, I think either result completely turns that on her ear. If she faces Rhea and does the honors for her at WrestleMania, I mean, what a rub that's going to give Rhea Ripley. And so what can you say about Charlotte, about the fact that, the most decorated, woman wrestler on the roster right now does the favor for a relative newcomer, an NXT competitor at WrestleMania? I mean, my gosh, what more could you say about her as far as her being gracious, to the other women in the division, or vice versa, if she does go over Rhea Ripley at WrestleMania and becomes a full-time member of NXT, what a boost to that brand it would be to have someone like Charlotte Flair on their brand, full time, at least for a while, as their women's champion.
That's true. I think it's a great look for NXT. It's a great look for Rhea Ripley. It's possible that we're going to have a takeover where Ripley defends the championship, and then the next night a WrestleMania where Ripley defends the championship. There are rumours of NXT being more involved. This is a great way to make that happen. I do believe Rhea Ripley's going to win, and I base that opinion on what I've been told about the post-Mania shake-up. This definitely makes it more likely that we're seeing more interaction with Ripley, with Charlotte Flair, things like that. Was maybe some interaction in the women's tag team title match. This definitely makes it more likely that we're going to have that post-Mania shake-up. And I don't see, personally, Charlotte moving to NXT. Because from what I've been told, NXT want to keep their sort of underdog feel, people who have that spirit. Charlotte Flair and the character that she is does not fit NXT right now, in my opinion. So I do feel she would lose.
Well, let's wrap up the show this week with a couple of quick hitters, just some news and notes that we wanted to make sure that we touched on this week. First off will be the suspension of Andrade. We found out after Raw on Monday that he had failed a wellness policy check, and due to that he was going to be suspended for the next 30 days. He was written out of storylines on Monday about taking the DDT on the concrete from Humberto Carrillo, but surprisingly he doesn't drop the United States Championship, so he's going to the next 30 days, on the shelf, but still as the United States Champion. What can you tell us about this suspension, and were you surprised that he did not drop the title on Monday and that they've elected to simply just keep the title on him, and effectively the title will be kind of on leave for the next 30 days?
Essentially, they made this decision on the basis that they could have a 30-day suspension without affecting storylines whatsoever. So the idea was that Humberto Carrillo would be against Andrade. They can keep that going. They can, I believe the 30 days runs out the day before the Saudi Arabia show. Don't quote me on that. But that does mean that they can have a rematch there. There could be some involvement, just have Zelina Vega speaking for him at some point. Or it could follow after at Elimination Chamber, which obviously comes straight after the Saudi Arabia show. So you could have the Saudi Arabia show, the next Raw you could have Andrade attack Humberto Carrillo, and they're straight back into the feud. Nothing changed. It is very clear that even though the wellness policy has been violated and the 30-day suspension is in place, it is not a punishment really, is it, when you don't get stripped of the title?
Do you think the fact that he's Charlotte Flair's fiance and Ric Flair's future son-in-law, do you think that has anything to do with maybe him getting off a little light in the eyes of a lot of people?
I want to say no. However, I know there is always backstage politics played. So I want to go out and say this is definitely not happening. But, and we've seen this historically, people like Hulk Hogan, the entirety of WCW in its heyday, people do tend to get their way if they have good connections and they're vocal.
Also on Monday, we saw Samoa Joe take a legitimate shot to the face and to the head, and he's actually taken out of the tag team match with him and Owens against Seth Rollins and Buddy Murphy. He's removed from the match by medical staff, taken to the back to be evaluated. I think for a concussion is the word that we're hearing. He doesn't return to the match. It doesn't appear that this was anything storyline related, at least that we can tell. It looks like that this was a legitimate medical removal. There was some concern for his physical state at the time and him being able to continue in the match. So any updates on Samoa Joe and his status, moving forward? Do we expect to see him back as early as this coming Monday? Was this something that may hold him out for a couple of weeks? Anything you can tell us about Samoa Joe?
The WWE are under a lot of scrutiny when it comes to concussions right now, particularly since TLC. So they brought in a new policy, which we also saw with Alexander Wolf. They take him outside, they check him. If there are any signs, literally any signs of concussion, that person is out of that match. And that is it. That is what happened here. They checked him during the TV break to see how he was feeling. You can tell immediately that there was something wrong. Joe reacts very badly, which is very different for Joe, and he was taken out of the match. He argued, that's both in character and out of character, he argued, but that was that. He was taken back. There will be several steps of assessment, but he has chosen not to say he's fine or he's not fine, and whereas Alexander Wolf was fairly fine with it. So if it is a concussion, they will treat him carefully, they will send him home, they will check storylines and give him some time off as needs be. I think with the storyline that they have, it's not really an issue if Kevin Owens is on his own for a week, because you can still tell that story by Kevin Owens getting a beat down and being outnumbered, and then the next week Samoa Joe comes back. He's not expected to miss much. From what I can tell, the initial signs are positive. We'll have to see when he comes back.
You mentioned it in passing at the beginning of the show, but Brock Lesnar and Matt Riddle apparently get into a little bit of a verbal confrontation backstage at the Royal Rumble. What can you tell us about that? Again, is this storyline driven? Is it setting up for something in the future? Was this legit? Sometimes it's hard to tell in today's WWE, but Brock Lesnar and Matt Riddle having a little bit of a heated conversation. What can you tell us?
This is another one that came from Alex McCarthy from TalkSport. It has been confirmed by a lot of other journalists since. So we can say that this definitely happened. Brock Lesnar approached Matt Riddle and said, "Stop trying to get a match with me," essentially. I'm paraphrasing. The annoying thing is we really cannot say that it's not storyline. That's the annoying thing. I doubt it was in any way staged. I really doubt that, because staging things for journalists is not a WWE trademark. Whereas, for example, I think AEW would reach into that basket a little bit more, just as an interesting way to keep kayfabe. But with WWE, this is something that happened backstage. Very few people knew about it. Only one person was able to confirm it initially, and people have confirmed it since. So it's very unlikely it was planned or planted. However, we have seen from the WWE Performance Center account since that they are still deriving this point, because they uploaded a video where Matt Riddle talks about a match with Brock Lesnar. So the whole thing is so back and forth and so confusing, and it is very hard to tell what is going on. If Matt Riddle wants a match with Brock Lesnar, it really doesn't matter what Brock Lesnar wants. If the fans start demanding it, that match will happen. However, Matt Riddle does not have the strongest audience on NXT right now. When he gets onto the main roster, I say main roster, you know what I mean, there are separate brands, and in this case I think we're all main roster, but when he gets to Raw or SmackDown, sports entertainment brands, he'll reach an additional audience. He might be able to get them chanting Brock Lesnar's name, and Vince McMahon is going to start paying attention.
There were some rumors out there, or maybe some connecting of the dots, that maybe suggested that this altercation before the show had something to do with Matt Riddle's performance in the Rumble match itself. A lot of people felt like he was eliminated pretty quickly compared to what people probably thought, especially with how over he was getting in NXT, and you would have thought that maybe he would be given a little bit more of a prominent role, or maybe a little bit more time to shine in the match. Anything you can shed light on that? Do you think that this altercation had anything to do whatsoever with the way that Matt Riddle was booked in the Royal Rumble match?
I do know Triple H put Matt Riddle's name forward as someone who should be in the Royal Rumble, and he put his name forward with the express intent, or hope I should say, of having some sort of encounter with Brock Lesnar. The WWE said, yeah, we will have Matt Riddle, and then at some point they have said, okay, but we're not going to have him with Brock Lesnar. It may be down to that backstage altercation. I personally find it unlikely, because of the way that they plan these matches out. It's very hard to make that last minute a change. However, if you look at the list, and as you recall, I'll have it right here, there are a number of people there who could have been moved last minute in place of Matt Riddle. And he was only in the match for 41 seconds. It's very hard to tell. When it comes to the idea of him being punished, it's not really something that they do when it comes to that. If he was going to be punished, they would take him out of the Rumble and they put Otis back in.
Last thing I want to touch on, and we, again, talking about the Royal Rumble, you talked about some people that were taken out last minute. Obviously, a lot of changes happened at the last minute going into a match like that. So I got to ask you, how disappointed were you that your man Rusev was taken out of the Royal Rumble match?
Oh, you got to do this to me.
Didn't even get to compete, much less, take the L didn't even get a chance to compete in the match.
They were protecting everybody else. That is all I will say on that regard. Rusev was definitely winning this Royal Rumble. And then he wasn't there, so we ended up with Drew McIntyre. I'm happy with Drew. But Rusev could have been just as good. He could have done all of that. And he could have come in at number 2 and just beaten everyone. Rusev, man. He's winning the next one.
Well, we shall see. We'll see. Maybe we'll get a Rusev McIntyre match, and get that WrestleMania match on the line. Maybe we can get a groundswell right here on Dropkick DiSKussions that we want to see Rusev versus Drew, or make it a triple threat. McIntyre, Lesnar, and Rusev at WrestleMania.
All you got to do is start chanting Rusev Day and never stop.
We hope that you enjoyed the Royal Rumble, and we appreciate you guys listening in this week on Dropkick DiSKussions, and we will be here next week as we continue our road to WrestleMania. If you want to follow Tom on Twitter, I suggest that you do that, especially with WrestleMania season. You know that all of the backstage stories and news and rumors are going to be flying around hot and heavy, and he's going to be the guy that's going to be on top of all of it. So make sure that you follow him on Twitter at Colohue. He also has a YouTube channel as well, so make sure you check that over. He has his own YouTube channel, has put up a lot of videos talking about news and rumors of the day, things that we don't have time to talk about on the show here, but he posts up there regularly about things that he's hearing about going on in the world of wrestling. So make sure you check that out and give him a subscribe over on his personal YouTube channel. You can also subscribe to the Sportskeeda YouTube channel right here where you can find Dropkick DiSKussions. If you want to follow me on Twitter, you can follow me at Korey Gunz. And, of course, make sure that you're checking out Sportskeeda.com for all of the best wrestling coverage with guys like Tom, like Gary Cassidy, etc., that are doing some really great things and some great coverage over there. We appreciate you tuning in again this week, and we will see you next time on the next edition of Dropkick DiSKussions presented by Sportskeeda.